All right, we're continuing in the Maimar, which is called Adon Olam, which is found in Maimar Melukatim Aleph, on page Taf Chaf Tes, near the end of the book, 428.9, page 429. And now we're on the fourth paragraph. Fourth paragraph. So we're explaining now. The Rebbe explains two things. First of all, a little bit about God. God, as we know, God creates the world, but there's a lot. That He creates the world, that's just like the tip of the iceberg downward. The most of the iceberg is like an inverted iceberg. The little bit we see down here of the God creating the world, that's a very, very, very how do you say, contracted, watered down version of what God is. Because God is reality. God is reality. And the reality that we see here is a very, very, very small example, like if you want to call that an example, like a hint at what God's reality is. But nevertheless, it is a sort of a hint. And from this world, the Kabbalists and others, they can understand a little bit about the nature of God. Why do you have to understand the nature of God? Because it's a commandment to love God. It's a commandment to serve God. It's a commandment to believe in God. You have to know, it's a commandment to fear God. You have to know a little bit about what you're loving, what there is to love. What are we believing in? But maybe even more important, we have to understand how this world is no contradiction to God. What do we do with this world? But a lot of the religions say, ignore it. Huh? Hard to do, huh? Hard to ignore. Well, that's because that's the only way you get into heaven. You have to ignore the world totally.
What does that mean? It's not a contradiction to God.
The world is not a contradiction to God.
What that means?
The world is here in order that with the world and through the world, we should serve God, and even more that we should reveal the Creator in His creation. Eventually, that's the motto of Judaism, that the world is not a contradiction to God. God is one. What does it mean that God is one? God is one means there's nothing separate from God.
So a contradiction would be disavowing God.
The taking away a person's enthusiasm for God that's also a contradiction. Well, the world, of course, there's no bigger contradiction to God. There's no bigger power that can contradict God than the world, or more exactly, our attitude toward the world. If you go into the world with no understanding of what's going on, it's like anything else that you go into with no understanding of what's going on. You know, you go into a shul, into a synagogue, and you think it's a supermarket. So yeah, it's going to be. You go into a supermarket and you think it's a synagogue. And then you're in a place, but you misunderstand what the place is. Same thing is with the world. You go into the world, you misunderstand what the world is, so it becomes a total confusion. It becomes depressing, it becomes aggravating, people fall into all sorts of traps of lust and jealousy and anger. When in fact the world is not really that. And part of the world is us. Part of the world is us. What is man? Right? There's all sorts of philosophers that have developed all sorts of methods and thoughts and things. And just take a simple example. Just what was it, 67 years ago, in Germany, right? All of the philosophers and all of this, when Hitler stood up, and he said the philosophers, the big people in the universities, they were among the first to agree with him. That's what the world is made for. It's just the world is just all these Nietzschean sort of ideas that the world is just a big battleground, and we have to, be strong and be the Superman, and don't let your conscience that's oversimplified a little bit, but don't let your conscience take away your potential. You have to go. That's what the world is about. As soon as people come up with different philosophies about what the world is and how to make people happy and how to so that's how the world goes. That's why the world is such a jungle as it is today. But essentially, and this is the message of Judaism, the world is not in any way a contradiction to God, unless you misinterpret it. All of and the part of the world is also ourselves. Right? That's the idea of making God a king. If you really make God a king, then you start to realize that everything that happens in the world is somehow or other for us to improve ourselves. Right? The bishvili nivra olam, like they say. The whole world was made for my sake. And it explains the Chassidus, for my sake to fix it. The whole world, everything in the world was made for me to fix it. So somebody cuts you off and this happens. Whatever happens, a person is, God forbid, thrown into prison. At a terrible test, an awful, awesome, terrible thing. Well, you have to know that this somehow or other is for you. It's for you, put it into your hands to fix it up, to add something positive where everybody is negative, to add something intelligent where everybody is stupid, to add something happy where everybody else is not. So, okay, that is what the idea of making in a big way. We do this constantly. I'm sorry, in an individual way, constantly. Every moment presents its challenges and its moment, but in a big way, we do it on Rosh Hashanah. Rosh Hashanah is the day when we say this whole world is a creation of God. Now the Rebbe explained, and God's creating it all the time. Now the previous chapters we explained that when we have a big part in this. That's why man was created. On Rosh Hashanah we make God into a king. It's a commandment. We make God into a king. When we do all the other commandments, also God reacts. When a Jew does a positive commandment, God reacts in a positive way. Here, mostly talked about the positive commandments. This builds up God's connection to the world, or if you want to say it builds up God's personality. It builds up what's called the 10 sfirot of God. Okay. So says the Rebbe, when a Jew puts on tefillin, God puts on tefillin. When a Jew learns Torah, God learns Torah. This builds up what's called the intellect, the chachma bina das, and also the emotions, what's called zer anpin over here, the God's kindness, God's different Kabbalistic names for God's personality. Just like we have a personality, so does God. Of course, it's infinitely different and more real than what ours is. Like I said before, ours is just the tip of the iceberg, the inverted iceberg. But nevertheless, it's so. And says the Rebbe, that's the purpose of the commandments. When a Jew does a commandment, it actually has an effect on God. And now he's going to say that it has somehow or other, and we have to get into this, an effect on not just God's external, how God is attached to the world, but also the essence of God. That's what it means that God is a king, melech. He ruled before anything was created. Adon Olam, says the Rebbe, that's the gematria Ein Sof, which refers to, according to the Shalach HaKodesh, the essence of God. And there was Asher Malach, there was the aspect of God's kingship before anything was created. Okay, Herschel? But Tzorach Lahavin, we have to understand, how do you do it is known. Okay? Maybe you can stop it there, and that can be the little introduction to today.